My son Reese didn't ask me to watch my granddaughters, he ordered me. It was a Thursday in late October, a day I remember because the last of the maple leaves had turned a furious, beautiful red, and my life was about to turn just as furious. He stood on my porch, the cold air rolling off him, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and something metallic. Maybe fear. He didn't even step inside. He just shoved 2 large backpacks at me and gestured to Anya, who was 7, and little Talia, barely 3, standing behind his legs like 2 frightened shadows. "Mum, I need you to take them. Quick errand. Couple of hours maybe," he said, the words clipped and flat. His eyes, the same grey-blue as mine, held not a trace of warmth, only a frantic, trapped desperation. 2 hours. That was 8 years ago. Can you imagine a 2-hour errand lasting an entire childhood? The cold dread that hit me wasn't about the inconvenience. It was the chilling certainty that this was a goodbye dressed up as a casual request. I watched the taillights of his beat-up sedan disappear down the road, and my hands, suddenly trembling, went to the small cold hands of the children I was left with. What kind of life did he think he was rushing away from, and what hell was waiting for us now? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. My own life was quiet then. I was Elara Dubois, a woman who cherished routine, a retired teacher whose world revolved around her small garden and her books. That night, though, my world was reduced to the frantic sound of 2 little girls whimpering in the guest room. I remember the sight of Talia's face, puffy and tear-stained, clutching a threadbare unicorn toy. I remember the smell of their clothes, not just unwashed, but carrying a faint, sour tang of neglect. I knelt down, my old knees protesting, and ran my rough hands over Anya's fine, pale hair. "It's okay, little ones," I lied. "Grandma Elara is here." Lies of comfort are still lies, though. I didn't know if it was okay. I didn't know where Reese was, or when he would return. 2 hours turned into 2 days. 2 days turned into a week. And the silence from my son was louder than any screaming match we'd ever had. I started trying to reach him. His cell phone was disconnected. I drove the old Ford to his rental house, a shabby place near the industrial park. The door was ajar. The landlord was already inside, throwing trash bags into a dumpster. The sound of the bags hitting the metal was the true announcement of his departure. "He cleared out everything but the debt," the landlord grumbled, pointing to a mountain of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. He handed me a single object, a faded, chipped coffee mug. Said to give this to his mum if she ever showed up. The mug was a cruel, pointless gesture, a final insult that offered neither an address nor an explanation. I held it, and I felt the shocking heat of fury rise from my belly to my throat. Reese had abandoned his daughters not temporarily, but completely. I took the girls in as my own. My pension, which was comfortable for one, stretched thin for 3. I sold the silver locket my husband Andre had given me. I started tutoring on the side, juggling 4th-grade math with bedtime stories and doctor's appointments. I traded my comfortable solitude for the beautiful, chaotic mess of motherhood round 2. Anya, the older one, rarely talked about her father, but I saw the pain in her sight, the way she'd watch other children being picked up by their fathers after school, her expression a mix of longing and shame. Talia, still a toddler, simply stopped asking. To her, I was her mother. My heart broke every time she said, "Mama Elara." I followed the law. I tried everything to find him. I placed legal notices in the local papers, though I knew he wouldn't read them. After a year, I hired a social worker who found absolutely nothing. Reese had vanished. He was a ghost. 3 years after he dropped them off, I went to court and petitioned for permanent legal guardianship. The judge, a woman with kind but weary eyes, granted it easily. The evidence of abandonment was irrefutable. I left the courtroom feeling a strange mix of relief and profound sorrow. The state had finally recognized what my heart already knew. These children were mine now, fully and legally. I thought the nightmare of Rhys was finally over. I thought the unbearable quiet of his absence meant peace. I was wrong. I never saw the danger coming, and most people don't. Subscribe so you're not caught off guard. 8 years passed, marked by the slow, steady rhythm of childhood. School plays, scraped knees, graduations. Anya was now 15, a brilliant, cynical artist. Talia was 11, all boundless energy and questions. I was 75, my hands now arthritic, my energy waning, but my love for them was an unshakable fortress. We were a family, we were safe. Then, 2 weeks ago, the front door chime rang. When I opened it, I saw a familiar face, now thicker and softer with age, standing beside a man in a ridiculously expensive suit. Rhys. The years had changed his face, but not the coldness in his eyes. The suit jacket, clearly tailored, screamed new money. The man next of him, slicked back hair and an arrogant tilt to his chin, was a lawyer. He extended a card. Attorney Silas Caney. We're here to discuss custody. I didn't invite them in. I stood on the threshold, feeling the cold stone of the porch beneath my slippers, and said, Rhys, you are 8 years too late. You have no right to this address. Rhys, the one who left his daughters with nothing but a half-empty box of cereal and a broken unicorn toy, had the audacity to laugh. Come on, Mum, drop the drama. It was a rough patch. Now I'm stable. I have a good job. I'm taking my daughters back. His voice was smooth, confident, and utterly devoid of the messy, raw human emotion I'd spent 8 years managing. I felt the betrayal not as a sharp wound, but as a deep, bone-aching ache. Silas Caney stepped forward, holding a sheaf of official papers. Mrs. Dubois, as the biological father, Mr. Vance retains primary parental rights unless there is a clear, ongoing threat to the children's welfare. Postpartum depression, financial difficulties, these are not abandonment, they are obstacles. He's recovered. You, on the other hand, are an elderly guardian with limited resources. We have grounds to pursue a claim for parental kidnapping, or at the very least a return to primary custody. Kidnapping. The word hit me like a physical blow. The sound of it echoed in my ears. I felt the quiet dread, not for myself, but for the girls who were upstairs doing homework. I looked at my son, the man I had raised, the boy who used to draw me crayon pictures on Mother's Day, and saw nothing but a predator calculating his next move. The sight of his tailored jacket, his expensive watch, it didn't fit the ghost of the man who left. I knew there was something else. This was not about fatherhood. This was about something ugly, something financial. But what exactly had turned my absent son into a legal aggressor? He opened the door and what he found inside. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, tell me in the comments, guilty or not guilty of abandonment? I let the lawyer serve the papers. I signed nothing, said little. But the moment I closed the door, I didn't panic. I walked straight to my basement, to the old cedar chest where I kept the relics of my past. I pulled out a small, faded blue folder, tied with twine. Inside was the paperwork from 8 years ago, the legal guardianship documents. But hidden beneath those, almost forgotten, was something else. Something I hadn't looked at in years. Something Rhys didn't know I had kept. It was a single, slightly wrinkled sheet of paper. Rhys's handwriting. A letter written a month after he vanished. He was hoping I'd forgotten it. He was betting on my memory failing. He had no idea what I was preparing. I felt a shiver, a cold touch of memory as I unfolded the paper. It wasn't just a letter. It was an insurance policy against this exact moment. I smoothed the paper against my kitchen table, its edges fragile with age. I didn't need to read the words, I just needed to remember the day I received it, the day I realized my son had drawn a permanent line under his responsibility. It was the crucial piece of evidence, but bringing it up too soon would be a mistake. I needed to let Rhys and his arrogant lawyer think they had the upper hand. I needed the final betrayal to be public. I thought that was the end. Until a strange email arrived on my computer. What secret did Rhys's lawyer think he was holding that I was about to expose? The truth didn't arrive in a courtroom subpoena. It arrived in a ping, a stark digital announcement on my dusty desktop computer. The strange email was from an unfamiliar address cryptically named Justice 40, short for Talia, my youngest granddaughter. The subject line simply read, "Reese's real reason." My hands, still trembling slightly from the shock of my son's visit, moved the mouse. I felt a cold dread, the kind you get when you realise the fire you thought was extinguished is actually smouldering beneath the floorboards. I was convinced this was another one of Reese's cruel games, maybe a phishing attempt to get financial details. I scanned it nervously, my sight drawn to a single sentence deep in the body of the text. He needs the capital from the life insurance policy he didn't know existed. My late husband, Andre. He'd passed away 9 years ago, just before Reese abandoned the girls. He had 2 policies, one that paid out immediately to me, and another, smaller one, established specifically for his grandchildren, locked in a certificate of deposit, CD, that matured 1 year from now, accessible only to their legal guardian, me, or their biological parents. Had my son been stalking my finances, waiting for this specific clock to run out? I felt a sudden rush of shock at the hidden truth. The email wasn't signed, but it contained a verifiable date. 2 months prior, Reese had made a significant payment to attorney Silas Caney. It included a brief scanned document, a preliminary asset search on my name, specifically flagging the Dubois Grandchildren Education Trust. I closed my eyes, the smell of old paper and dust suddenly heavy in the air. My mind flashed back to the tailor-made suit Reese wore. It wasn't success. It was desperation disguised as prosperity. Imagine losing everything you worked for overnight. Reese wasn't fighting for fatherhood. He was fighting for a cash withdrawal. This changed everything from a custody battle to a financial heist. What would you have done if your own son was trying to steal your grandchildren's future? I decided to meet the lawyer's aggression with strategic calm. The court date was set for 2 weeks out. I called Silas Caney. I wanted to hear his lies directly. The sound of his voice was oily and self-important. "Mrs. Dubois, I hope you've considered the offer we extended. Joint custody, $200 a month in child support from Reese, and the girls will be in a superior educational environment." He was offering me back $200 of the thousands of dollars I'd spent, all while planning to seize the 6-figure CD when it matured. I maintained a measured, quiet intensity. "Tell me, Mr. Kane," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "does your superior educational environment come with a mandatory background check on the new co-parent?" The line went silent. I felt a tiny spike of satisfaction, a small relief that my calm reflection was unnerving him. The sight of my home, the way the girls had flourished within these 4 walls, became my shield. Anya's chaotic art supplies covered the dining table. Talia's favourite blanket, worn thin from years of use, lay on the sofa. Every scuff on the wooden floor, every worn edge of a book, was proof of a stable life Reese had actively rejected. I looked at the old blue folder, the one containing Reese's abandoned letter. I wasn't going to use it yet. It was my nuclear option. I needed to know exactly how deep his treachery ran. We've all seen cases like this, but this one is different. The email had mentioned a life insurance policy. I pulled Andre's files. Sure enough, the CD was tied to a special provision. If the biological parent was found to have voluntarily, legally, or criminally abandoned the children for a period exceeding 7 years, the current legal guardian had the right to petition the court to immediately dissolve the parent's claim to the funds and have the funds transferred solely to the children's trust, locked until age 25. 7 years. Reese had been gone for 8. He was betting on the letter, I was betting on the clock. I hired my own legal counsel, attorney Priya Sharma. She was young, sharp, and thankfully had no patience for Silas Caney's bluster. When I showed her the anonymous email and the trust documents, her expression became grave. "Ilara, this isn't just a custody case. This is a clear attempt at financial betrayal using the children as collateral. Reese is hoping you only have your 8-year-old guardianship document. If he can reverse that, he controls the funds." I placed the faded blue letter on her desk. He was counting on me forgetting this. Priya read the contents, the written abandonment, and her eyebrows shot up. "He never mentioned this," she murmured. The document wasn't legally notarized, but it was written, signed and dated 3 days after he dropped the children off, a powerful piece of character evidence against his claim of temporary setback. Over the next few days I tried to maintain a calm domestic facade, but the quiet dread was always there, a low hum beneath the surface. I'd watch Anya help Talia with her homework, and a wave of regret and grief would wash over me. Grief for the life Rhys had forced his daughters to live, grief for the son I had lost. Do you think I was too forgiving here? I wanted justice, but more than that, I wanted the girls protected from their father's poisonous motives. Anya walked into the kitchen as I was stirring dinner, looking at me with her sharp, observant eyes. "Grandma, is Dad trying to take us back?" she asked, her voice small. I looked at the sight of her face, seeing the fear she was trying to hide. I couldn't lie. "Yes, sweetie, he is trying, but we have protections and we have the truth." I pulled her close, smelling the faint scent of charcoal from her art supplies. "And we have each other." Just as I felt a surge of strength from her hug, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. The sound was muffled, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Rhys. "Mum, you need to call off your lawyer. I just want my daughters back. I need them. I'll make things right." He sounded desperate now, less confident than the man on my porch. He warned me, "Don't show up tomorrow." But he had no idea what I was preparing. I remember teaching Rhys how to ride his first bicycle, the sound of his wobbly laughter mingling with the crunch of gravel under the training wheels. I'd told him, "Look ahead, not down. If you look back, you'll fall." Now, hearing his voice on the phone, choked with desperation, all he was doing was looking back, not at the daughters he abandoned, but at the money he wanted to seize. "Mum, I need you to listen," he pleaded, his tone shifting from the slick confidence of the courtroom to the manipulative whine of a child caught in a lie. "This is just business. I'm not saying I'm a great father, but I am the father. If you back off, I'll take care of you. I'll make sure you're comfortable." The word comfortable tasted like ash in my mouth, a crude attempt to buy my silence with the very funds he intended to steal from his own children. Had he actually convinced himself that this was reasonable? I felt a surge of betrayal so pure and sharp it felt like a physical touch. My son was trying to bribe me with my grandchildren's inheritance. What would you have done if your own son said that? I kept my voice low, measured, the quiet intensity of a slow-burning fuse. "Rhys," I said, using the name I hadn't used in conversation for 8 years, letting it sit heavy in the air. "You don't get to define comfortable for me. My comfort is seeing Anya finish high school and Talia learn to play the clarinet. Your comfort is the only thing you've ever cared about." His calm reflection snapped. The fear and desperation vanished, replaced by a cutting aggression. "You think you're so righteous, don't you, Alara? You think you're the perfect parent." "Well, let me tell you what I know. That guardianship you got, it's shaky. I have witnesses that will testify you were obsessed with keeping my daughters, that you alienated them from me, that you actively hid their whereabouts. I'll prove you committed parental alienation, and then we'll see who the judge calls the criminal." The threat hung there, a suffocating, invisible smoke. Parental alienation. The ultimate weapon wielded by an absent parent seeking to punish the present one. The quiet dread settled back in, heavier this time. It wasn't the threat of losing the money that chilled me. It was the thought of Anya and Talia being pulled into a destructive public legal battle, forced to justify their love for me. I looked out the kitchen window at the sight of my rose bushes, noticing the way the afternoon sun caught the dew, making them look deceptively peaceful. But that wasn't the last surprise my son had planned. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just absorbed the poisonous words. "Is that all, Rhys?" I asked, the sheer lack of emotion in my voice startling even myself. He stuttered, taken aback by my lack of reaction. "Look, Mom, just meet Caney tomorrow. He has the paperwork. Sign over the guardianship voluntarily. It'll make things easier for everyone." I'll see you in court, Reese. I hung up, the sound of the disconnected line a clean break. I immediately called Attorney Sharma and relayed the conversation. Priya's voice was firm. He's bluffing about the alienation, Ilara. But we can't take chances. We need to solidify the grounds for abandonment, and we need to prepare the discovery of an object that changes everything. She was referring to the single sheet of paper in my blue folder, the original handwritten abandonment note. We will only present that when his lawyer commits fully to the alienation defense. We have to show the court that he wasn't alienated. He ran. The next morning, I was alone in the house. Anya and Talia were at school. I needed to act without their sight or knowledge. I carefully removed the crumpled envelope containing the original handwritten note from the blue folder and placed it in a secure, sealed manila envelope. But I didn't just seal the original. Following Priya's instruction, I added something else. A small, unassuming receipt from a storage facility, one I had discreetly acquired just yesterday. Reese had mentioned witnesses. That detail had gnawed at me. Who would lie for him, and why? I realized I needed a preemptive strike, a way to discredit his entire claim before he could even call his first witness. I decided to pull the thread on the anonymous email's source, Justice 4T. I reached out to the only person I thought might have the combination of insider knowledge and conscience, Reese's new wife. I knew her name was Lena. I found her email address and sent a short coded message. I know about the CD, and I know about the storage unit. Is your conscience worth $50,000, or are you ready to talk? It was a risk, a shot in the dark based on a guess, but I had to escalate the stakes. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-awareness, drinking chamomile tea and trying to process the sheer audacity of my son. He wasn't just trying to regain custody, he was trying to erase 8 years of my life and replace it with a lie, all while lining his pockets with his children's future. The regret and grief was no longer for myself, but for the damage he was poised to inflict on the girls. Do you think I was too forgiving here? Just before dinner, my phone buzzed. It wasn't an email, it was a text message from an unknown number. The text simply read, "Reese is lying about the job. He's been living off credit cards. Meet me at the Golden Spoon Cafe at 8 a.m. tomorrow, alone. I have something crucial about the witnesses." I looked at the site of the message, feeling the shock at the hidden truth solidify into actionable evidence. This was Lena. She had taken the bait. I didn't just have a moral high ground now, I had an insider. I thought that was the end. Until the phone rang. And this time, it was a sudden entrance of an unexpected person. The woman who knew all of Reese's secrets. The Golden Spoon Cafe smelled overwhelmingly of burnt coffee and old toast. I arrived exactly at 8 a.m., feeling the adrenaline-fueled anticipation that I hadn't felt since my teaching days when I was preparing for a surprise inspection. I chose a booth in the back, obscured by a fake plastic plant. I didn't have to wait long. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, slid into the seat opposite me. Her sight was striking. Expensive clothes, manicured nails, but her eyes held the frantic exhaustion of someone running on empty. This was Lena, Reese's wife, the woman who had replaced me in my son's life, and who had replaced my granddaughter's with his new child. She didn't offer a greeting. She just looked at me, her voice a strained whisper that barely cut through the cafe's din. "I know about the storage unit," she stated, mirroring the phrase I had used in my baiting email. "Reese is desperate. The lawyer Caney told him that if he got custody by the time the CD matures next year, he can apply to have the funds released early, citing financial hardship, their financial hardship. Reese told me he was going to use the money to pay off Caney and pay the deposit on a new apartment. He was going to put the rest in a joint account with me." Her confession was a stunning admission of financial motive and betrayal. "So, the job, the stable life, it's all a lie?" I asked, stirring my untouched tea. "It's a house of cards, Ilara," she replied, shaking her head. "He hasn't worked full-time in over a year. We're maxed out on 4 different credit cards. We got an eviction notice last month. He started sniffing around the custody idea right after his attorney found the information about the CD. He doesn't care about Anya or Talia. He hasn't asked me a single question about their favourite colours or if they're doing well in school. The regret and grief in her eyes were palpable. Not for my granddaughters, perhaps, but for the mess Reese had dragged her into. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone close? This was the second wave of betrayal from my son. Not only had he abandoned his first family, but he was now endangering his second by building their future on a foundation of lies and theft. I pulled out the manila envelope I had prepared, the one containing the handwritten abandonment note and the small, unassuming receipt. You mentioned witnesses, I said, keeping my tone strictly factual. Who is he using to lie about parental alienation? Lena leaned in, her whisper dropping lower. His current landlord, Alistair. Reese convinced him to testify that you called constantly and threatened him, demanding Reese's address, and that Reese told him he couldn't see the girls because you moved them suddenly and illegally. He's promising Alistair a cut of the CD money to lie on the stand. A simple lie, but powerful in a courtroom if unchallenged. I pushed the manila envelope across the sticky table. This is what I have, I said. Read the receipt first. Lena's touch was hesitant as she pulled out the tiny piece of paper. It was a receipt for a self-storage unit, dated 3 days after Reese left the girls. The unit's address was near his old apartment. The receipt was for a 6-month rental paid in full. She looked at me, confused. A storage unit? Why is this important? Because, I explained, Reese told the landlord he left his rental apartment because of urgent medical issues that forced him to leave town immediately. He told me he was going for a quick errand. But this receipt proves that 3 days after abandoning his children, he had the presence of mind and the resources to sign a 6-month contract to store his belongings. It proves premeditation, not desperation, and it's dated the same day he wrote this. I pulled out the original handwritten note, the voluntary renunciation of parental rights, and placed it on top of the receipt. Lena read the note, her sight wide with shock at the hidden truth. I, Reese Vance, 29 years of age, hereby voluntarily relinquish all my rights as father. She looked up, breathing raggedly. He told me he had no documentation, that he just left. I smiled, a cold, weary smile. He was hoping I'd forgotten. I took the documents back. You have your own son with Reese, Lena. If he wins this, he will loot the CD, pay his debt, and then what? He'll be broke again with a fresh set of legal bills, using the $200 he promised to pay me to cover his own expenses. When that money runs out, he'll abandon your child just as easily as he abandoned mine. Do you think I was too forgiving here? I stood up, leaving enough cash for my tea. I don't want your testimony against Reese. I want you to keep the landlord, Alistair, away from the courthouse. You tell him that I know about the deal and that if he commits perjury, I have documents that prove Reese was planning his departure, not just panicking. I have the storage receipt, and soon the court will have this letter. His lie will ruin his credibility and mine will ruin Reese. I walked away, leaving Lena staring down at the empty table. I had escalated the stakes. The lawyer was confident because he thought he was fighting a sentimental grandmother. He had no idea he was fighting a retired teacher with a paper trail, an insider, and the calm determination of a woman protecting her den. I thought that was the end. Until the phone rang. And this time it was my lawyer, Priya, with news about the anonymous email sender. The courtroom air was thick, heavy with the smell of stale coffee and polished wood. Reese sat across the table, his sight locked on the judge, Theodore Mason, with a performance of anxious parental responsibility. His lawyer, Silas Caney, looked less arrogant than before, perhaps sensing the foundation of his case was wobbling. I sat with Priya Sharma, the blue folder, the one containing the handwritten abandonment and the storage receipt, tucked securely in my large leather purse. The tension was palpable, a shared silent awareness that 8 years of history were about to be decided in a matter of hours. This was the moment of full-circle climax. He was looking at me now, daring me to speak the truth. But what he didn't know was that I had a witness of my own. Caney opened with a theatrical display of regret and grief. He painted Reese as a victim of debilitating, sudden mental health crises and financial ruin, forced to make the painful decision to leave his daughters temporarily with the one person he could trust, their grandmother. He then turned, pointing a dramatic finger at me. "But Mrs. Dubois," Caney boomed, the sound echoing, "took advantage of that vulnerability. She moved the children, cut off contact, and actively engaged in parental alienation to sever the biological bond. She used the trauma of his absence to cement her own role." I looked at Reese. His face, trained and smooth, held a hint of a sneer. He had crossed the line. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a calculated betrayal, an attempt to rewrite the narrative and label me, the rescuer, as the villain. I felt a cold, righteous fury. We've all seen cases like this, but this one is different. Priya stood up calmly. "Your Honour, the defence asserts parental alienation, which requires showing intent to maliciously restrict access. We can prove with written documentation that the petitioner, Mr. Vance, voluntarily initiated the restriction and separation." The judge, a serious man with kind eyes, nodded. "Ms. Sharma, you may present your first piece of evidence." Priya walked to the stand. She didn't pull the final weapon yet. Instead, she presented the court with the legal guardianship documents I had obtained 5 years prior. "Your Honour, after 3 years of zero contact, no financial support, and a complete inability to locate the father, my client legally established guardianship. The law required us to publish notices in 3 major papers. Mr. Vance did not respond to a single one. Furthermore, we are prepared to present testimony showing exactly why Mr. Vance suddenly reappeared after 8 years of absolute silence." Caney stood, objections flying, trying to keep the focus on my supposed alienation. "This court has a duty to examine the current relationship, not ancient history. The petitioner has established a new life, a stable home." "With whose money, counsellor?" Priya cut in, her voice slicing the tension. She turned to me. "Elara, can you tell the court about your late husband's certificate of deposit and why it is now central to this custody dispute?" I explained the CD, the Grandchildren Education Trust, locked for the children until their majority, with a key caveat. If one parent was proven to have voluntarily abandoned the children for 7 years, that parent could be permanently barred from accessing or managing the funds. I emphasized the amount, a substantial 6 figures. The judge leaned in, his sight fixed on Reese, who suddenly looked pale, beads of sweat breaking on his forehead. "Mr. Vance, is it true that you were unaware of this specific trust until recently?" Reese swallowed hard, forced to acknowledge the financial incentive. I found out a few months ago, Your Honour, but that had nothing to do with my renewed desire to be in my daughters' lives." He was lying, and the smell of desperation seemed to cling to him. "Very well," the judge said. "Ms. Sharma, your next witness." Priya paused dramatically, letting the silence hang. "Your Honour, we call a witness who can speak directly to Mr. Vance's true intentions and the preparation of his supposed witnesses for this court, Lena Vance, the petitioner's current wife." The shock at the hidden truth on Reese's face was absolute. He lunged forward, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor. "Objection! She is an interested party, Your Honour. This is ridiculous." "Mr. Vance, control yourself," the judge warned, gavelling the desk. Lena walked into the courtroom, composed and wearing a simple dark suit. She refused to look at Reese, who was now being physically restrained by Caney. She was a sudden entrance of an unexpected person. She testified in a clear, measured voice, detailing their financial collapse, the looming eviction, and Reese's decision to pursue custody only after discovering the trust fund. She laid out the timeline: CD discovery, contact with Caney, then the demand for custody. The air was thick with betrayal. But then Lena delivered the final blow, the one I had prepped her for. Reese promised our landlord, Alistair, a portion of the inheritance to lie under oath, claiming that Alara had threatened him and moved the children illegally. He was going to use the money to pay off the landlord's debt. Caney, utterly defeated, stood up, his face grey. Your Honour, the defence requests a brief recess to confer with our client. The judge looked at the witness stand, then at the disarray at the petitioner's table. Recess denied. The witness's testimony stands. Ms. Sharma, do you have any final evidence to present regarding the alienation defence? Priya looked at me, giving a barely perceptible nod. I reached into my purse, feeling the crinkle of the fragile 8-year-old paper. This was it. The ultimate truth. The paper Reese prayed had been lost to time. I thought that was the end, until the final truth came out. The small, faded blue folder was now open on the clerk's desk, its contents exposed for the court to see. The tension was suffocating, thick enough to taste. Reese, having been forced back into his chair, stared at the folder with the wide, wild sight of a cornered animal. I felt the shock at the hidden truth ripple through the courtroom, not from the people who knew the story, but from the realization by the legal team that their entire case was built on quicksand. Priya retrieved the last document, holding it gently, almost reverently. Your Honour, Mr. Vance's attorney has spent considerable time attempting to prove my client maliciously alienated the children from their father. We submit this final piece of evidence which proves, quite definitively, that the alienation was initiated, intended, and executed solely by the petitioner, Mr. Reese Vance. I leaned forward, watching as Priya approached the judge, placing the fragile yellowed paper on the bench. It was the discovery of an object that changes everything. Judge Mason picked up the document. He read the cursive handwriting, my son's handwriting, silently. As he read, his professional, neutral expression gave way to one of deep disapproval. The sound of the courtroom was reduced to the frantic scribbling of the court reporter. Ms. Sharma, the judge said, his voice grave, can you state for the record what this document is? It is a voluntary renunciation of parental rights, Your Honour, Priya stated clearly. Handwritten, signed and dated by Mr. Reese Vance on October 15th, 8 years ago. This is 3 days after he dropped the children off for his alleged quick errand, and it is dated the same day he paid for a long-term storage unit for his personal belongings. The pairing of the two pieces of information was devastating. It proved he wasn't fleeing suddenly due to a mental health crisis. He was planning a permanent escape. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Reese. Mr. Vance, can you confirm the handwriting on this document is yours? Reese looked down, his lips trembling. He was trapped. He couldn't deny his own handwriting. I was not in a sound state of mind, Your Honour. I was severely depressed, overwhelmed, and I didn't know what I was writing. He was pleading, but his plea rang hollow after Lena's testimony about his financial motives. The judge read the key phrase aloud, his voice measured and authoritative. I, Reese Vance, hereby voluntarily relinquish all my rights as father of Anya Vance and Talia Vance. I waive any right to visit them, contact them, or claim them in the future. This decision is definitive and irrevocable. The quiet dread that had been a low hum in my life for years was finally breaking. Mr. Vance, the judge continued, this document, combined with your wife's testimony regarding your financial distress and your failure to respond to legal notices for 5 years, suggests a clear pattern of voluntary and intentional abandonment, not temporary setback or parental alienation. Silas Caney, sensing the total collapse, tried one last desperate move. Your Honour, a non-notarized handwritten note does not legally supersede a biological father's rights. It's emotionally manipulative, but legally insufficient. In a vacuum, counsellor, perhaps, the judge countered, tapping the document. But here, in the context of 8 years of silence, a successful guardianship petition, and confirmed financial motive for return, it proves intent. It proves that Mrs. Dubois did not alienate the children. She simply honoured the written, definitive and irrevocable wish of the father. I felt the touch of tears welling in my eyes. tears not of sadness, but of profound relief. I had held this secret, this painful truth, for 8 years, not using it as a weapon but as a shield, hoping Rhys would one day mature and return for the right reasons. His betrayal had now forced the truth out. Do you think I was too forgiving here? I had always kept the truth of his absolute abandonment from the girls, telling them instead that their father was travelling for work. The judge passed the document to Caney, whose face crumpled as he read it. The truth was undeniable. Your Honour, Priya said, seizing the advantage, based on the petitioner's written renunciation, confirmed financial motive and the established welfare of the children under their grandmother's care, we moved to dismiss the custody petition with prejudice, and we further petitioned the court to immediately rule on the Dubois Grandchildren Education Trust to permanently bar Mr. Vance from any access or claim to those funds, citing the 7-year abandonment clause. The judge nodded slowly. The court will take the documents and the petition under advisement. However, before ruling, I need to hear from the children who are now old enough to express their preference, especially given the seriousness of these findings. He looked toward the back of the courtroom. Anya Vance, please approach the stand. My granddaughter, now 15, walked forward. Her face, usually guarded, was pale, but her spine was straight. She sat down, and the judge leaned toward her. She knew something monumental had just been revealed, but she didn't know the full extent of the document. The quiet dread was now hers. I thought that was the end, until the final truth came out. I remembered the sound of Anya's pen scratching across paper late into the night. She wasn't drawing then. She was writing letters to her father, letters she never sent, asking him, "Why didn't you look back?" She would always look down, never ahead. Now, seated before the judge, her head was held high. The quiet dread was now focused on her own testimony, and I felt a fresh wave of regret and grief for the impossible burden Rhys had placed on her young shoulders. Judge Mason spoke softly, aiming to put the 15-year-old at ease. Anya, I know this is difficult. We've heard a lot of adult talk today, but now we need to hear from you. Do you remember your father, Rhys Vance? Anya glanced at Rhys, whose sight was fixed on her, a desperate plea in his eyes. I have flashes, Your Honour, she replied, her voice steady, despite a slight tremor in her hands. I remember being hungry. I remember a lot of yelling. I remember the day we came to Grandma Ilara's house. It was the first time in a long time someone asked us if we wanted a bath, or if we were cold. She paused, taking a slow breath. My father says Grandma alienated us. But how do you alienate someone who never calls, who never sends a birthday card, who never asks if you're alive? When I turned 12, I stopped asking Grandma where he was. I realized the answer was, he simply didn't care. Her words were delivered with a cold, devastating maturity that seemed to deflate the air in the room. What would you have done if your own son said that? Rhys's composure finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, but his tears felt performative, motivated by the sudden realization of his loss, not remorse. This was a crucial emotional betrayal. Anya, the judge asked gently, your father states that he has a stable home now and wants to resume his role. What is your preference regarding custody? Anya looked at the judge, then directly at me, and finally, directly at Rhys. My grandmother is my mother, Your Honour. She took me to the emergency room when I broke my arm. She taught me how to drive. She stayed up with me when I had nightmares. My father is a stranger who only appeared when he thought there was money to collect. I want to stay with Grandma Ilara. The judge thanked her and then called my younger granddaughter. Talia Vance, please approach the stand. Talia, 11, was the energetic one, but she walked to the stand with unusual solemnity. She had been too young to remember much of Rhys's neglect, but she carried the deep-seated dread of uncertainty. She clutched a handkerchief, her touch nervous. Talia, what do you remember about the time before you came to live with your grandmother? Talia looked out at the courtroom. "I remember being scared a lot," she said, her voice a small broken sound. "I remember the unicorn. It was ripped, and my mum, my biological mum, said she'd fix it. She never did. Grandma fixed it the first night we were here." She looked at me and offered a small, fierce smile. "Grandma Ilara is the one who helps me with my clarinet. She comes to my soccer games. She never leaves. I don't know that man," she said, pointing a small finger towards Reese, who flinched. "He is not my parent. My grandma is. If I have to choose, I choose to stay where I am loved and safe." The judge leaned back, placing his pen down. The sight of his firm jaw showed his decision was made. The children's testimony had confirmed the documented evidence of abandonment and highlighted the profound betrayal Reese had inflicted upon them. Before the judge could rule, Reese suddenly stood up, ignoring Kaney's frantic whispers. "Your Honour, I just want them to know the truth. I didn't just leave because of money. Their mother, my wife, she forced me out. She made me leave them because she didn't want the responsibility." This was the twist I hadn't prepared for. A desperate final accusation against the children's long-absent biological mother, who had been out of the picture for years. It was a shocking revelation, designed to deflect blame. But that wasn't the last surprise my son had planned. "Your Honour," Priya said, moving quickly to prevent a meltdown, "the petitioner is introducing unsubstantiated, irrelevant claims. We request an immediate ruling." The judge slammed the gavel down once, the sound cracking like a whip. "Order! Mr. Vance, your claims about the children's biological mother are irrelevant to your 8 years of voluntary abandonment. Sit down." The judge turned his attention back to the table, shuffling the heavy documents. He glanced at the renunciation of parental rights, the storage unit receipt, Lena's testimony, and the children's statements. He had everything he needed. I thought that was the end, until the judge spoke again. Judge Mason looked at the pile of documents, the handwritten note of abandonment sitting starkly on top. The sight of it seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He had witnessed a complete, devastating betrayal in 2 acts. First, Reese's abandonment, and second, his aggressive return driven purely by greed. He tapped his gavel once, the sound a final, heavy punctuation mark on 8 years of silence. "The court has reviewed the testimony, the existing legal guardianship, the children's preferences, and the documented evidence of abandonment," the judge began, his voice cutting through the suffocating tension. "We find the petitioner's claim of parental alienation to be entirely unsubstantiated and refuted by his own written and signed voluntary renunciation of parental rights, dated just 3 days after he voluntarily left his children in the care of Mrs. Dubois." He looked directly at Reese, who was slumped in his chair, defeated. "The court recognises that Mrs. Ilara Dubois stepped into a vacuum of responsibility, providing not just physical care but the emotional stability, love, and consistency necessary for these children to thrive. She is the psychological parent, the true parent, in every sense that matters. Therefore, the petition for custody and reversal of guardianship filed by Mr. Reese Vance is hereby denied with prejudice." The gavel cracked down a final time, the loud thwack hitting me with the force of catharsis. I felt the touch of my granddaughter's hands reaching for mine from the gallery, a silent, joyful connection. But the ruling wasn't finished. The judge turned to the matter of the inheritance. Furthermore, based on the documented 7-year abandonment period, the evidence of financial motivation, and the children's welfare, the court is immediately granting Mrs. Dubois' petition. Mr. Reese Vance is permanently and legally barred from any access, management, or claim to the Dubois Grandchildren Education Trust. The funds are to remain securely managed by the legal guardian Mrs. Ilara Dubois until Anya and Talia reach the age of 25. Reese jumped up, finally unleashing the pure fury of his failure. "You can't do this! That's my money! I'll appeal! I'll ruin you, old woman!" Judge Mason slammed the gavel repeatedly. "Silence! Mr. Vance, your actions today have demonstrated precisely why you cannot be trusted with these children or their financial future. Bailiff, please escort the petitioner and his counsel out of the court." As Rhys was led away, his final desperate words of betrayal echoing, "I'll ruin you," I felt no regret and grief, only peace. I looked at Anya and Talia, tears streaming down their faces, but tears of relief. A few days later, the three of us were in my garden. The maple leaves, now a deep, burnished bronze, covered the ground. Anya was drawing, and Talia was practicing her clarinet, a sweet, slightly off-key sound of domestic life. The sun was warm on my skin. The case was over, the inheritance was safe, and the lie of Rhys's quick errand was buried forever beneath the court transcript. I sat with them, watching them grow, watching them finally look ahead, not down. The moral of the story, I realised, isn't about winning a legal battle. It's this. A life built on abandonment will always collapse when faced with a foundation built on love. You don't have to be perfect to be a parent. You only have to be present. And that simple, hard-won presence, that is the most powerful weapon a child has. We took control of the narrative, and we protected what was ours. If this happened in your town tomorrow, wouldn't you want to know how to protect your family first? Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, if Rhys came back a year from now completely reformed, would you take his call?